realized it was Arts Festival weekend when I booked
Oh my
it. You
gosh.
know? I was like, oops.
I know. You've got this arts festival arrows on it.
Thank you.
Artists created.
All right, well, I'm gonna get us started, and thank you for coming, everyone. Many of you I know, a couple I don't, but this is really kind of a trial. First time I've ever spoken on the subject, and just kind of wanted to get some information out there, have practice. There is a reason why this all happened very suddenly, because some things started moving in the city's direction that I didn't know about until recently, and I was like, oh, we should probably talk about this. So today I'm gonna hopefully get this done in about 20, 30 minutes. I'll go as fast as I can and then open up some questions. But today we were talking about point access blocks, and subtitle would be why we build apartments differently in the United States than everywhere else in the world, and what we can do to change that. First off, so my name is Alec Davis. Most of you already know me. I'm the founder and chair of Momentum DSM. We are a registered nonpartisan PAC advocating for better urbanism here in Des Moines and the metro, all volunteer-led. Started off last year, so we haven't been around very long. Our tagline is, let's build a more accessible, livable, sustainable Des Moines for everyone. The flip to that is just saying we want to make Des Moines less car dependent. And the way I describe that is saying, I want to build a community where you don't need to own a car to be a material participant in society. So that's what we're advocating for. It's a whole bunch of reforms and changes we can be doing here locally and as a nation. And this is one of the weird ones. So what do we talk about when we say accessible? Who has access to our community and when? So I like to say that if you can't drive here, if you financially can't afford a vehicle or you're physically unable to drive, you're basically a second-class citizen when we talk about transportation. And so I don't think that's a just way to build a community, and I think there's a lot of things we can be doing to make our community more accessible for everyone. When we talk about livable, we talk about all the space and infrastructure we dedicate towards cars. That's infrastructure not built for people, and it's not spaces for people. So allowing people to connect more, make areas that aren't as polluted with noise and emissions and stuff from vehicles, I think is really important. It also allows us to come together better instead of kind of traveling around individually in metal boxes everywhere. And sustainable. And there's two threads to this. One is obviously environmental. So transportation emissions are the #1 source of carbon emissions in America, and we have chosen to prioritize the most inefficient way to move everybody around. And then also from a sustainability, from a financial standpoint, we're now 75 years into the suburban experiment, as we like to call it, in America, and most of the first neighborhoods that we built 75 years ago, the ones I grew up in, are seeing a lot of struggle to reinvest and maintain all the infrastructure due to low density sprawl. So we want to build a more resilient community that can last for generations, and this is all part of that. Why Momentum DSM? I stole this slide from a slide I did from an environmental group. So yes, high carbon living, low carbon car light lifestyles is what we're advocating for, but there's a lot of other things. But the reason I chose Momentum DSM as a PAC and why we want to get into politics is because local policy dictates all of these decisions, or a lot of them. And shaping the beliefs of who set these policies is what we feel the most effective way to get change at scale quickly. So that's kind of the why. Real quick on myself, like I said, most of you know me. I have a background in engineering, but not one that helps in this kind of stuff. An MBA from the University of Iowa. My day job, I run a restaurant company, and actually, I will say too, I'll preface that the one thing that comes in helpful is when we were doing our inspection for our first restaurant, we had, you have to have a sprinkler in the walk-in cooler. And the fire chief was coming through and checking, and we did. And the contractor I had at the time, who was right there, he asked the fire chief, he's like, have you ever seen a fire start in a cooler? And the fire chief just responded, I don't write the code. So I say this as I start to say, I know for a fact not all our building and fire codes are rigorously based in science and research. So I also serve as vice chair of Des Moines Waterworks and a bunch of different organizations, just trying to say I'm doing this out of somebody who believes this is a good thing for our community, wants to make it a better one. Also as important, I am not a licensed architect or planner, a real estate developer, elected official, or fire protection professional. So I'm a I'm a hobbyist in this, and or advocate, however you want to say. Oh, shoot, that's why. So who are my experts? What am I drawing from? I'm really just parodying from people that I have found as influencers in this space, so there's not really any original thoughts in this. This is all stolen from other people. The two main proponents here in the United States are Michael Eliason. He's the founder of Larch Labs. They're an architecture firm and think tank in Seattle. He talks a lot about just different development patterns from his time working in Germany. Baugruppen is a co-housing development. Passive house is super energy effective housing in eco-districts that are just really cool and really different than what we do here in the United States. And then Stephen Smith, he's part of Market Urbanism and then the Center for Building in North America. And he does a lot of research on building codes and the differences between those codes in various countries and the outcomes that those drive. So he's kind of the knowledgeable guy. I've actually got to email with him, which is really cool because he's kind of one of my urbanism heroes. But he's provided me with a lot of talking points around the codes and fire safety. Larch Lab, as I mentioned, if you're not familiar, I would check them out. They do a lot of cool things and kind of push the needle here in the United States around development patterns. And then, like I said, the Center for Building is also really cool. They're kind of the single stair. That's the other name for this reform, as I'll get into it. One of the leaders here. All right, so the big question, what are point access blocks? When I say that, what does that mean? So there's two different building layouts there. The top one is what you would see really across a lot of the rest of the world when we call a point access block. It's a group of apartments around a single stairwell. And then oftentimes in multifamily, they'll just put one next to the other, next to the other, next to the other. That's like a development pattern you would see in Germany, for example. The one on the bottom is a North American development pattern, and if you've been in a North American apartment building, a modern one, especially, you probably recognize this. It's a hallway with units on both sides connected by a stairwell, and then two stairwells. The top one you can build in the United States, but only up to 3 stories, whereas the height restrictions in the rest of the world are quite a bit more generous. And then there are 3 communities, New York City, New York City, Seattle, and Honolulu have allowed an amendment up to 6 stories of the type at the top, the point access block. The bottom one we call a double loaded corridor. So what is different about the US and Canada? Why are we like this and everyone else is like that? Well, we had a lot of fast population growth in the 1800s, early 1900s, and we had a lot of forest available, which made building out of wood a really easy thing to do. There were a lot of probably hints that maybe doing that wasn't always the greatest. You can think of Chicago and some of the fires that they had. But we decided to go stay with wood framing, especially modern day light wood framing, as our kind of traditional, for this size of development, traditional framing material. The rest of the world kind of said, we're not going to build buildings out of highly flammable materials. They chose one path, we chose another. So that's just kind of how we got here and why we're a little bit different than everything else.
Quick question, are those highly flammable materials less expensive than the materials used to say direct?
Yes, they are. And there's 2 parts of they are cheap. Also, we have normalized our supply chain and trades have all standardized around them. So when we talk about concrete and masonry construction that's used in a lot of the rest of the world, we're not good at it. So that adds to the cost too.
So it's cost and expertise and
correct. Correct. So double-loaded corridor, as I showed earlier, and again, this is Michael Eliason. He did I'm stealing a lot from a presentation that's on YouTube from Housing Forward Virginia that he can speak so much better to all this. I'm just gonna steal some of his talking points. But this is kind of the traditional, anyone in the planning design firm recognize pretty traditional 5/1 structure, units on both sides of a hallway. So basically what that corridor does is, and we'll talk a lot more, cuts the building in half. So one thing you'll notice is outside of the end cap units, all the other ones only have light and window and air on one side. So that restricts what you can do from a livability standpoint. It also just takes up the hallway takes up a lot of the building's floor plate. So you have all that space dedicated to common area that you wouldn't see others. So these are 87% efficient on this one in terms of how much of the floor actually is rentable and usable space. In point access blocks, they're mid-90s sometimes. And then also, this is when you hear people complain, why are American buildings so boxy and bulky? This is the code. This is the reason that they all look like that. So what are the benefits of point access blocks? So this is a building in Seattle. It's 4 stories, so it would not be legal to build here in Des Moines. And there's just a lot of different things that I've learned through, especially through Mike's work, that I think are important. One of the biggest ones is just multi-aspect and multi-bedroom units. So they facilitate so much more flexibility in terms of design, both on the site and just how you can incorporate units around a single stairwell. One, you can get a lot more units that have the ability to have windows on both sides, so you can cross-ventilate, you can get sunlight on more sides, so it's just a more livable situation. You get a lot more ability to design in 3 and 4 bedroom units. So a lot of the critiques about modern American apartment buildings is it's just usually a lot of studios and 1 bedrooms, maybe 2 bedrooms. Some of that's just driven by finance and money, but some of it's also driven by code. And then one that I think is really important is because in modern U.S. urbanism, we tend to, at least now, are allowing more density on corridors, so on our major roads. I disagree with that. I think we should allow it on the quieter parts of our neighborhood as well, because that's good for people living in apartments. But regardless, is when you have a double-loaded corridor and you stick it on a road, half those units are going to basically have to have their bedrooms against the road. So that's the noise, the light, the air pollution that comes from being next to a road. With the point access block, you can actually design a building where none of the buildings are facing the road, or none of the bedrooms are facing the road. They're all on the quiet side of the building. So I think that's a really cool thing for livability when we're talking about urban apartment buildings. And then the smaller floor plate allows for more green space. So you'll see in some of these European designs, the buildings are smaller, they have more open space on the development, and then they also can be set back from each other a little bit further, so you're not looking across your apartment right into the next one, which happens a lot of times in US multifamily. So here's a design on the left example where you kind of similar size building, number of units, what it would look like. The bottom is the double loaded corridor in the US construction, and the top is a single stair or point access block, basically 3 put right next to each other. In this example, Mike was pointing out how you can have the same number of bedrooms in these 2 buildings, but you have a 1,000 square foot savings on the one on the top is 1,000 square feet smaller on each floor. So that saves costs, that saves a lot of different things when you're talking about building construction. This is a cool overlay too that he did. The red outline is a project in Seattle, so that's how it would look that's the floor plate if it was built in the United States, and then comparatively how it would be done if it was done in Germany. This cost savings are back of the envelope math, but there's at least something there. I don't know, I don't think this is a true scientific rigorous experiment, but just showing you again the difference, the buildings that you see, if you traveled to Europe and wonder why buildings look different, that they're constructed like this. They have lots of individual stairwells throughout the construction. So what I think this is really cool and allows us to do is facilitate this infill development and density supporting our walkable transit-oriented neighborhoods. It makes development on smaller lots easier. So right now, developers, especially in infill, it's really tough because you often have to amass several parcels in a row, and that has acquisition costs through it to be able to build something that pencils. Whereas when you have more flexibility in your design criteria, you can develop on smaller lots. You can do a lot more. There's just a lot more flexibility. This is, I think, similar in Germany. Grassy tram street is kind of always the fun urbanism meme, but notice the buildings next to it. Those are all single stair buildings, very close to transit, and really helps us create more sustainable neighborhoods. So why are they illegal to build in the United States? The history of the code, as I understand it, and kind of watching a couple of presentations, is it actually comes from post-World War II. Insurance companies were looking for an underwriting standard when they were financing construction. At the time, New York had a second means of egress. It was actually typically a outdoor stairwell, which you probably recognize this design type from New York if you've ever been there. They had good fire data, safety data, but there was also a part where New York hadn't really been constructing many buildings out of light wood frame in the last 75 years too. They were doing a lot of masonry, so what was really driving their safety is hard to know. Again, this goes back 75 years. There wasn't really a lot of science behind it. It wasn't tested. It was just kind of adopted and then standardized the country over eventually. And why should we change this now? So why am I talking about this? Well, I always start to say it's we have inertia and status quo bias around light wood framing that I don't think is going to change. We'll continue to do that. But we have had a lot of changes since these codes were first created. Most importantly is that we require sprinklers for all multifamily buildings, and that's the biggest thing. We also now have fire-rated assemblies in terms of walls and doors and stuff that are designed and required to burn at a slower rate. And in single-stair buildings, we have, like in Seattle, they actually require the stairwell to be pressurized. So you maintain a positive pressure in the stairwell, and it makes it really hard for smoke to fill the stairwell, which is actually something that you have a risk at in a double-loaded corridor. The technology has enabled us to really drastically reduce the fire risk and death in this country, which is a really good thing. One of the things I guess I don't have it in here later, but I think the change in the last 40 years is 50% reduction in fire-related casualties in the United States in the last 40 years, and even 70 or 80% if you go back a little bit of that. And some of that's due, we don't smoke as much as we used to, so that's good. But a lot of it is driven by sprinklers, the adoption of sprinklers. The code has not changed at all. We've been building the buildings the same way, which probably goes to show that the code isn't driving a lot of the safety. And really what we are in a modern approach to building construction is understanding that it's really not about how quickly can you get people out of the units and out. It's really about how well can you do at preventing this fire from expanding beyond the unit in which it started. And we've gotten pretty good at that, which is driving a lot of our safety. And that's what point access blocks are designed to as well. Showing here just kind of a cool building in Stockholm, mass timber, which is a construction method that we're starting to develop better technology here. We've even got some of those buildings here in Des Moines, which is cool. Just really, really cool buildings, really, have really good carbon footprints and all that. And we're just limited in what we can do here. So are they safe? This is the question that, right now we're kind of grappling with. Fire departments across the country are being kind of tasked with looking at this, and mostly they're just what is this? This is different. It's hard to, there's not really a good data-driven approach because it's apples and oranges. We build one way, everybody else builds it another way. As a country, we have an okay fire record. We're middle of the pack for structural fires causing deaths and stuff like that. But so in point access block development, the window or balcony is considered the second means of egress. If needed, you would kind of get rescued by the fire department. That's a common practice worldwide. Our fire departments are a little unsure of it. They're just not as experienced. But again, with keeping other fire safety requirements, most importantly sprinkling in the buildings, which actually a lot of these buildings in Europe aren't even sprinkled. They don't even require that until you get to a high rise. So, and they have better fire safety records than us. So keeping that really kind of keeps that threat of the fire spreading beyond the unit really low. So are they safe? They're just different, is what I would say, and how we think about the risks and the trade-offs of that is part of this conversation. Sorry, it's not the easiest slide to show, but most of the fire deaths in our country actually occur in detached single-family homes, and that's because they have different fire safety requirements. You don't have sprinklers in your home. You don't even have anyone checking to see if your smoke detector works. So, and we accept that because of the benefits we believe in as a country of detached single-family homes. We place high priority on them. It's your right to die in one as an American. I don't, if we really wanted to reduce the number of fire deaths in this country, we could be making single-family homes illegal. I'm not aware of any legislation that's currently being proposed for that. But like I said, mentioned earlier, we really have had a really big drop in fire deaths, and fire safety has improved. And so much of that has been done with other sprinklers and other fire protection methods. And then also when you talk about the risk benefit of double-loaded corridors, there's also the risk of the smoke in the hallways, which actually contributes to a lot of injuries and deaths during fires in the United States. If you remember, there was a pretty famous fire a couple years ago in either Brooklyn or the Bronx that I think 22 people were killed. And that was actually in a double stairwell building. And what happens is those doors are designed to be shut at all times, but they get propped open, especially in communities that don't have air conditioning and whatnot. And in the fire, what happens at that point, then that stairwell becomes a chimney and provides a lot of fresh air really fast to the fire and makes it really worse. So the hallways, in a point access block, your travel distance from your unit out of the building is like steps. You're in and you're out. In a double-loaded corridor building, oftentimes people get disoriented. They're not sure which way they're supposed to go to find the hallway, and it can actually make egress even harder. So where are we locally on this? And the reason I'm talking about this is because I found out like a month and a half ago that the city was talking about this, which was really cool and interesting. I went on a walk with Josh Mandelbaum about a year ago, and I had just learned a lot of this stuff watching a couple information sessions, and I was pointing out to him, this is the Soul building on Ingersoll. Colin, you'll know it well as a former resident. That I just learned about this code thing and why all apartment buildings look like this. And I even have even more recently noticed another critique that people have is because the buildings are so boxy and bulky, we oftentimes require the facade to get broken up so that it looks different, looks like different buildings. And you can actually see in this one that it's designed to look like 3 different buildings, just because it's all one building. It's just an architectural thing we do to make it look different. But Josh, I sent Josh the policy brief from Large Lab on this stuff, and he actually sent it along to the city, and they actually started kind of talking about it and having a conversation with Seattle and learning about their code, which was really cool because not many people, there are groups working on this right now, but we're actually kind of taking a swing at it, I think. And I'm like, okay, so why am I doing this speech? My joke was, if this goes to the board and the only person asking about it is the pizza delivery guy, I don't know if they're really going to care. So I'm trying to draw up interest from architects and developers and kind of get more support so that there's actually, the board actually understands. So I went to the last Building and Fire Code Board of Appeals, which would be the group that oversees this locally, and we do have local control on this, so if we choose to adopt it, we can do that. At least we have local control right now. That's obviously a thing in the state right now, but which is kind of why we're keeping this on the down low. But my understanding is the city is recommending we adopt the Seattle Code provision up to 6 stories. We'd be the first community to do this in decades, which would be really cool. But that would also then need to go to a city council work session and get voted on by council. But we are talking about it, which is why I'm here today, and thank you for coming, everyone, because this is something I was like, a year ago I would have said, it'd be really cool if we could do this in 5 to 10 years, and the fact that we're talking about it right now is really cool. So this is from the Center for Building. It goes on, but Stephen's actually tracking all these bills that have been passed. And if you read through if you go to the website and look, almost all the bills are 2023, 2024. This is a movement that's 18 months old, really, or at least in terms of getting traction. But as many states have passed bills where if they have state fire marshals asking them to look at it and research the subject. And that's really ultimately where the crux of it is, because it's pretty easy to sell the city and economic development on the virtues of this stuff. The people that we need to get to the table as well are our fire protection professionals, and that's part of this conversation around how do we have this thing, get them to understand it's different, it's not necessarily worse, it's just different, and it's a different way of thinking. So what could you do to support? Spreading the word. So as I started my initial conversations here locally, there didn't seem to be a ton of knowledge about this as a reform. So I'm kind of just telling people like, hey, let people know. That's part of doing this, of like, especially in people that are developing and doing infill development within this city, because they're the ones that would, in theory, bring it to life. That's the other risk I have on this, is I don't want it to be like, hey, we passed this reform and then nobody knows we just don't build anything. I want it to be impactful. Potentially, right, I'm trying to figure out I don't know where we are on all this stuff, so I'll find out more on the next board appeals meeting, but like, I've got one developer who's written me a letter of support after I talked to him, just saying like, are you supportive of this design change? And I'm telling I also say like, telling people like, I'm not trying to force the fire department to say anything. I got enough enemies in this town for this stuff. I don't need the fire department to hate me too. So, but we're trying to have a conversation with them and bring them up to speed and get them to like, look, if you are okay with this, we do see the tangible benefits, and that's why we want to do it. And then you can also support Momentum DSM financially or just on social media and everything as we continue to work to do our advocacy here. Like I said earlier, we could be an urban development leader in this space. I think, honestly, if we did get it passed somehow, I think we'd probably get some national press, which would be really cool. Maybe not from like the New York Times or anybody, but from some kind of more nerdy organizations that care about this. And we can build, this will help us rebuild our city in a more sustainable, long-term future. It'll help us build density in our older neighborhoods, and really just kind of allow us to live what I think is a better urban life. And I'll close. This is a screenshot from Mike's presentation, but he was kind of, so much as is pointing out the differences in the development patterns. And one of the things he talks about here is, this looks like a different style of development, and it's because it is. Those are all just point axis blocks, one after the other. They look like different buildings because they are different buildings. In the US, we've just kind of like put a modulation in the facade to make it look like a different building. I think it's a really fascinating topic. I think it has, relative to the amount of press it gets, it has the ability to unlock a lot of cool development in the United States. And I think, if we were to take a swing at this and get it done, we'd be a leader in the space. So with that, I'll say thank you and happy to take any questions.
So when you say the city is talking to Seattle, is that the fire department people, or is it
it's
plan and zoning, or who is sort of
building? I guess whatever the office that falls in. Brian Bishop was the one who's been kind of leading this from the city, and he, at least when I say talk, I mean I saw an email where kind of Seattle spoke about their response and how it's worked for them, and which was really cool. One interesting thing the fire marshal said at the last meeting, and again, part of this is having this conversation is also just hearing their response and getting, okay, what are the outside of like we don't like it or we don't know, is like, okay, but why? One of the interesting things I learned from talking to the fire marshal at the last meeting, he said, was Seattle, they have 5 to 6 men per truck when they're going out. Des Moines, we have 3, and that's mostly a funding and staffing resource. So, they have concerns around, if they were having to do extractions from balconies or windows and stuff like that's a very labor-intensive thing, and they don't have that many firemen, which I get. And if the horse trading is we gotta get them more funding too, I'm ready to go to bat for that. But also, going back to the building design, is so much of the principles of the design is not having mass fires and having buildings that don't burn as easily, which we do get still with our Lightwood, famous. I mean, we had the one in Des Moines, what was that, 10 years ago or something that went down. They just had a really bad one in California because they get these, especially before they're all framed out and sprinkled, but when they're just, it's literally a matchbook structure, and they go ablaze all the time. Now they don't have people in them, but But yeah, so just kind of having that conversation with the fire department and understanding where they're at on this and what we can do to support. So.
One thing I really like is that each stairwell only has 2 units accessing it. So from a security perspective as well.
Yeah, so it can have more than 2. You can have, so the Seattle code allows up to 4, but it's
Still limited. It's not the whole building in the same stairwell.
correct. It's limited in that regards. Mike, and I haven't lived in like Europe in one of these buildings like he has, so he speaks to it a lot differently, but he speaks a lot about the community aspect of like you get to know these people in your stairwell a lot better. It's easier to just run into them as you're coming and going. He had an example in his presentation about like a building in Austria during COVID, they'd all come out into the central, they have a really large open, it's got like a light in the top of the stairwell, and they would come out and like sing people's birthday songs and stuff when they were all on lockdown. So I don't talk about that as much because I just have never experienced the tangible benefits, but yeah, it's more intimate in terms of how you interact with your neighbors. There's fewer people coming and going across a large building that has like, however many hundreds of units and everything, so.
I was under the understanding that in the last couple, 3 or 4 or 5 years, the city had gone through a process where they updated their building codes. Does the way the building codes are now today, would it even allow for a developer to, in a traditional single-family neighborhood, get 3 plots and actually do a building like that? Is it even possible?
Well, so
even if they approve the
yeah, there's 2 things. There's the building code that dictates how the buildings are built, and then there's the zoning maps which say what can be built. So, and the building codes are always kind of being adopted. Most communities, as I understand, generally follow the IBC unless they want to have specific amendments that they do. So that would be something we would have to specifically change to make these buildings legal anywhere in Des Moines. We'd have to change that first. And then where could you build them? Like right now you could build it in like downtown zoned areas and I think along parts of Ingersoll, but into residential neighborhoods, if they're zoned, R1, no, not really. It still says only a single family house. I don't know, that's another battle that I'll also work on next is our zoning maps, but so.
one of the things that I think Des Moines is trying to do, and you would probably be at least somewhat in favor of, is doing this infill so that we don't have streets where there are vacant lots or homes that look like just wildlife live in them as opposed to people.
Yeah, there's, as I was kind of saying, like I'm fully supportive of basically getting rid of single-family zoning in the entire city. And that's always a kind of a thing, because we use the phrase eliminate single-family zoning, and people think that means you can't have a single-family house. Well, that's not what it means. It just means you can build stuff besides the single-family home. Minneapolis is the kind of current example of that. Granted, they're facing a lawsuit on it, but they've, from environmental groups of all people, but they have basically made it legal to build anything up to a triplex on pretty much any lot in the city. So that's really helps increase population density. And the way I like to describe it is, and there's kind of similar, what we call YIMBY, right? Yes in my backyard or abundance movements. It's just basically trying to reduce all the restrictions we have around developing and building houses. And I stole this from another city, but it's like, I like to talk about like Des Moines, 400,000 people in Des Moines, but without like expanding our geographic boundaries, double the size of the city, but the same city size. And when you think about what does that mean, that doesn't mean like New York or Manhattan. We probably just need to achieve population densities that are similar to like Ingersoll, a mix of single family and multifamily to get to that. So it's not really that radical, but just we have a very strong stigma against multifamily housing in this country. And people, every time they say it, especially it's kind of a generational thing, but they're just like, it's going to lower my property value. This is like the thing you hear left and right. And it's like, no, these could be really good. And especially these point access block buildings, I think I forgot to mention this earlier, but with the ability to have more bedrooms and kind of different size bedrooms, they're also a lot better for families to live in urban environments. Our modern 5/1 buildings aren't very good if you're trying to raise kids or anything. It's just like, they're really designed for like young professionals. So that allows more and various types of people to live in our urban neighborhoods. So.
What if you have a building like this, the point access blocks that are, say, 6 stories, and you need to install elevators versus stairwells, or with stairwells? Does that change the configuration? Does it change the cost? What's the impact there?
So in a small scale development, it's about the same because you would have an elevator with the double stairwell. You might even have 2 elevators in a double loaded corridor, right? With the stairwell, you have the elevator. There are, when you get to like, this is again a European style development where there's like just tons of them. That is a lot of elevators. There's a whole, Stephen who does this, there's a whole nother thing around elevator reform that I don't have time to fully get into today, but we also have really stringent requirements on the size of our elevators in the United States relative to Europe and the rest of the world. Our elevators require that you can accommodate a full-size stretcher all the way laid out. That's not a requirement in Europe, so they have smaller, more cost-effective elevators. This stuff goes so deep. It's weird. There's plumbing changes that I don't even fully understand and can't speak to, but it's cheaper to plumb this way. So yeah, don't show this to the fire marshal, because when I was talking to him, I was like, he's like, yeah, I could see that, be good for some like one-off infill developments, but we probably wouldn't allow them, like a bunch of them. And so I'm like, well, okay, don't look at this. But I think the Seattle code allows 2 together, so you can have 2 right next to each other. So it depends on exactly how you're designing the building, but it is generally in smaller roads, should be relatively costs about the same in terms of elevators, and then you have savings on the building because you have a more efficient building. If you get to something like this, the only way to make it work is probably we have to pass some more reforms.
And to your zoning question, I have a friend who does have, he's a small developer who has rezoned residential lots that he owns to build multifamily. It can be done on a case-by-case basis. Part of the problem is putting all the lots together so that you can get them rezoned.
Yeah, so it can be done, but what we typically say in kind of urban circles is legalize more housing by right. Right now, you have to go acquire the property, and then you have to go through a zoning change process to do that. But we want to make it legal to build more density just by the zoning code itself. And I'm working on an event that I want to do in the fall around Plan DSM that we've adopted like 6 years ago or 7, I can't remember, and basically do kind of like a review not post-mortem, but like, hey, oftentimes these are 10 to 15 year plans. We're about halfway through, like what's working, what's not working, and stuff like that. So we did a lot of, Plan DSM has a lot of talk about the stuff that it does and then what it actually does that I complain about, because there's all this stuff about form-based code, and you really focus on the form of the building and rather the use and intent. But that's like, then you get into it and it's really just traditional zoning. It's got all the restrictions that you normally would have. So it's kind of, it claims to be a lot more progressive than it really is, and that still dictates us locally. And this is all Des Moines. I don't even know the suburbs really, but it's Des Moines even more. So.
Did the fire department say that then you need to have more mass timber building, or you need to sprinkle more on like a 3-story or any of that stuff, or was it, we'll give you this if you do that, or were they?
No, and I didn't have a long conversation with him. And it's interesting, I don't quite know what so the fire marshal doesn't sit on the board. He just is there to like, I think, advise. This is a board that I did not know existed until 6 weeks ago, so I'm kind of learning. It's mostly, the actual board is made up mostly of people who are in like the trades and development world, so, and because they're usually speaking about, plumbing code and stuff like that. So he's there, the way I would read it, because also when Brian from the city talked about this and to the board, they looked completely uninterested, and like he was like, we have to do homework now, because he had sent them some materials. I say, which could be fine, because I honestly think, for the most part, they're just going to defer to the fire marshal. So if he says, yeah, we sign off on this, I think they probably would too. So, but I just don't know. It's a good question around. I think we'd like to see mass timber. I've been talking with the Cutlers, who obviously do infill development, do mass timber development, and they've been interesting. I haven't had a chance to have long conversations, but they had to use like a fire consultant to get some of their stuff, because it's just, again, fire departments are risk adverse, obviously, for a good reason for the most part. But because of that, they know what they know and they don't know what they don't know. And so when it's new and it's different, it takes a lot of conversation. So would this support more mass timber? Sure. Does mass timber burn slower than light wood framing? Yes. So that would be great. From a sprinkler perspective, we're already there. Like, we already require it. I'm assuming you guys, because I think it's anything more than 2 units goes under the multifamily building code, and at that point you have to sprinkle all the units. So we're already doing it, and that's why we were seeing all the success that we're seeing in fire prevention. So, and we're not proposing to get rid of that. Obviously, it's like even if it might be honestly be overkill, but it's like, and we know that adds a layer of safety that really helps. So, all right. Any other questions?
Have you spoken with Councilmember Simonson?
I haven't yet. I kind of wanted to do this today too, just as practice, and also see where the conversation with the Board of Appeals goes next week in fire, because I don't want to come out against them. Even though I have my beliefs and opinions, I don't want to aggressively come out against them if they go the other way. Right now, it's not a war that I'm willing to wage at this point. So. But they would then go to what I don't know either would be, because Josh talked about it potentially being on an August work session. I don't know if it would be this specific code change in general, or if it would be a series, because they're kind of working on a package of reforms to help people and it would be, we should be able to sell this to Connie as economic development tool, right? This is making it easier to build more housing in Des Moines, and that's part of her process is like, let's look at the codes and the rules and get rid of the bad ones. And I'm like, this I think is a bad one. Let's get rid of it. So.
Part of the problem is when they have the changes, like when they allowed ADUs in the city of Des Moines in 2019, they're still so expensive to build that I've only seen 1 or 2 brand new ones.
Yeah. I always felt like the ADU thing locally was going to be less impactful, just because you don't have where you do see a lot of them being built is like in California, where the housing prices are so high, the marginal cost of adding that extra unit, you can pay for it. We don't have that level of housing crisis in Des Moines right now, but and that was a question when I was talking to the Cutlers. I was like, do you see value on this, or am I just, does it only work in Seattle because of their housing prices? And I don't think so. My understanding, I think, is these would pencil and you'd get some cool developments, but I'm not a developer, so I can't tell you 100%. So, but yeah, we want to do code changes that really change things versus the ADU, which we changed the code, but we didn't change the built environment very much. So.
Well, even in Chicago, they didn't really, and they did a pilot, and they really didn't. There wasn't like a big amount of ADUs built, because they're looking to expand it citywide, but it's not like it was legendary in its impact. So
yeah, and if you go back to that, like the one, like this building, like this is a 4-story building that would have otherwise been like an ADU. It's actually behind a house there. So that's like, and that's again how much they need housing in Seattle on the West Coast is.
It really hurts.
that-
Wow.
Yeah. So.
So that's in the backyard of that house on the left?
Yeah.
Holy moly.
Is it the same parcel, or is it just that the house on the left has a 0 lot?
That I don't know.
Oh.
So.
That is ADU super
Yeah.
center.
And what I.
Vancouver has a lot of this too, like they call them like laneway houses, right? Like essentially the backyards, they've got infilled with like this kind of development.
Wow.
Yeah, and what I like the way what Mike talks about it when he, on that the presentation I was watching. He talks a lot about like how we in America, North America, Canada too, really, we have this very bifurcated urbanism where you go immediately, and you can see it in Des Moines, right? Where in my house, you go immediately from downtown to single family housing, right? And I can step out my front yard in my single family home, and I live in a single family home, truth be told, and I can see the tallest building in the state. It's like a mile from my house. And so this is kind of goes back to that, missing middle conversation that we made it really difficult and hard to build that kind of medium density. What Mike talks about in this is allowing what he calls the missing mid-rise. So it's that that kind of middle. It's a little bit more dense than a townhome or whatever, but it's not a skyscraper either. And this kind of helps unlock some of that too. In my opinion, we're gonna have some weird things like this in theory to kind of rebuild our cities because, I'm not entirely against like low density single family neighborhoods. I just don't think they should be right next to our dense urban. They're supposed to be more scattered out and on the edges if you want that kind of quieter experience. But like for an urban environment, we don't need a bunch of single family homes right next to the largest buildings in the state. So.
That's Seattle, you said?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. And the newbies didn't take down.
Well, but it's also if you're looking at the architecture there, that blue house looks quite a bit older than the multifamily, and it's built at different times. That's probably part of it too, why it looks so different.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just.
So, how many units would be in that building? 6?
I would imagine that there's probably 2 on each floor. Or there might only be 1 on each floor even,
There's no
but
parking too.
yeah.
No
There's
street
always
parking.
2 on each.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So.
That's what my next question was gonna be, is that near a metro station or a bus stop or?
Presumably, I don't know.
I mean, if we built a building like this, there'd be a parking lot there.
Yeah. It probably was a parking.
Well, that's something that I've thought about on some of those lots on Ingersoll is could you build and the city's actually been pretty good about being forgiving with parking requirements along Ingersoll. I was actually, the first info session I was ever gonna do was on parking mandates. And then when I started talking to the city about can you give me examples of projects that have been blocked because of parking requirements, they didn't have many because most people build it anyways here because it's Des Moines, but also when they've wanted exemptions like the Cutler's building, the city's pretty good about just granting the exemption. So yeah, could you build something like this on Ingersoll and rent apartments to people and say there's no parking provided? I don't know, probably not, but could you do it with less than 1 per unit or 1 per unit or something like that? Maybe. So maybe there's ways we can kind of start. And the thing is, if you can get more of these, then to build a walkable neighborhood, you have to have enough people who live in that neighborhood who can walk. As my line, the example I always use for kind of put it in perspective of Des Moines is Beaverdale, which gets touted as a walkable neighborhood, and it kind of is. Some of those people can walk to the grocery store, but if you look at the fairway that they built, and they only wanted to have 1 entrance, and the city wanted them to put it on the street side, and they put it on the back side parking lot. Well, that's because they know most people are still going to drive there. There's not enough population density in Beaverdale for it to be an actual walkable neighborhood. So now building more multifamily in around the corridor of Beaverdale, I would support it. Beaverdalians probably not, but it's part of that just chicken and an egg thing around building a community that's not car oriented when you're already in a car oriented community, and that's really hard. But I think I use Ingersoll, I think, as the best example of something that we have. It has pretty good connectivity. It has pretty good transit service. And I think that's kind of the highlight I always use to when I talk about this stuff, is I think that'd be the first place that I think it could be potentially helpful in our development. So. And lastly, I think the other thing I'd check, there's kind of a personal mission in some of this, just because, like I said, we would be the fourth community and we'd be the first one in a long time. But as much as I think it could unlock some things for Des Moines, I think this also just helps other communities in the country. If we can figure out a way to do this and pass it and provide an example, hopefully we could help communities that really need it, like on the West Coast and the East Coast, where they are experiencing a true housing crisis, and help them unlock more development in their communities. So we'll see, but that's my TED Talk, I guess. So thanks for coming, everyone.
So when is the next meeting of that?
July 11th, I think.
Do they meet at one of the city buildings, or?
Yeah, they meet at the municipal building there on MLK, East 14th and whatever.
Sure.
So I was, when I went, the guy was like, I don't think they get a lot of attendees to that meeting, because the chair was like, and we have a guest. Do you want to introduce yourself? And I was like, I'm the guy responsible for this, I guess. So, but yeah, so we'll see. But it's a fun. If anything, I hope you walking away now, because I always say this is one of those things, when you see it, you can't unsee it. So I hopefully now, like, I can't look at an apartment building in Des Moines and not have this thought around the code differences. So sorry if I infected you all, but that's kind of the goal of this. So, but yeah, appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.